It's almost over.
Yes.
That reminds me, we need to be out of here by 9. Oh, we are live? Oh. All right. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. My name is Maria Ortiz. I am co-chair of Housing, Health, and Human Services for Manhattan Community Board 4. We meet the first Thursday of every month at 6:30 p.m. And this is our monthly meeting for October. And I'm going to read my spiel to you, but before I do, because I might forget to say it, we need to be out of this space by 9 p.m. today. So we are going to make our questions, comments, concerns as brief as possible and stick to the main idea of the question or comment. And I will remind you again of that later. My co-chair is here, Joe Restuccia. He'll be up shortly to speak. Per the Manhattan Borough President's Office, the New York State Open Meetings Law, and MCB4's hybrid policy, in-person attendance is required for all full board and committee meetings unless you have an extraordinary circumstance and or disability. Committee members who are joining via Zoom must leave their cameras on. Thank you. I'm going to skip some of this. Tonight's meeting is being recorded and currently live streaming on YouTube. We encourage everyone to sign up for eBlast to get the agenda. If this is your first time, how many participants do we have? Jesse? I'm just curious. Okay. All right. So in the Zoom world, thank you for being here. If this is your first time, and for anyone who's here for the first time, what happens is the process for the meeting is that we have a presentation. And after each presentation, first the committee will get to ask questions. The committee members are here sitting on the side. They will ask questions to the presenters, then the members of the public can ask their questions or make a comment. And then finally, the discussion goes back to committee, okay? On some of the agenda items that we're going to discuss tonight, committee members may end up voting to write a resolution that next goes to full board and gets voted on. If you're attending virtually and you want to comment or ask questions after a presenter and after a committee has spoken, you must raise your hand using the raised hand button on your screen. I don't know if anyone's calling in, but if anyone's calling in, you have to press *9 to raise your hand. When we are via Zoom, I usually like to do self-introductions of the community members, but we're not going to do that tonight. And tonight on the agenda, we have 3 things. The first is the, I forgot how I was planning to say it. It's about tenants' rights and protections regarding the NYCHA proposal. Ryan, Chelsea, Clinton Community Health Center updates. And then we're going to go over Housing, Health, and Human Services statement of, not the statement of district needs, the budget priorities. Thank you for committee. And I guess I will introduce the first presenters, or Joe, you want to come up? Thank you. Yes.
Yes, I think it's HTC West.
Yeah, so JD was just asking about internet access here. All right.
Welcome, everybody. Tonight we have a first presentation is by NYCHA and also with questions from Legal Aid Society. And just to recap, we've had a couple of meetings in the past couple of months regarding the Chelsea NYCHA proposal. And specifically, the community board is trying to break this down into portions that we can talk about section by section, because it's a very massive proposal and we can't talk about everything all at once. So tonight, specifically, it is about tenant rights. And I want to get very clear. We're going to have a presentation by NYCHA. We're going to have some questions and about from Legal Aid Society about tenant rights. And then we will take questions or comments from the public. Again, I want to note that we're talking about a proposal, whether the proposal is renovation, demolition and new construction, or a combination of both, whatever it may be at the end of the day, the tenant rights are something that we all have common ground on. We have reached an agreement in the Chelsea Working Group on a list of tenant rights. The tenant associations were part of it. Every aspect of tenants were involved in it. And we want to get those enumerated, make it clear. And then the goal tonight, after we have this discussion, that this committee will write a letter, draft a letter to go to NYCHA, go to the full board at the beginning of November, for NYCHA to respond back to the community board that yes, all of these rights that are detailed, that were talked about back and forth, and then the others that may come into question are going to be considered as part of the proposal. So we're going to have that very serious discussion, and then we'll talk about much more difficult things as we go down the road. We expect to be talking about this subject for the next 6 to 7 months at least. And every time both committees, Chelsea Land Use or Housing Health and Human Services, will take up a specific topic. So it is not just for, against, in between, we don't like, but it's specific item by item. So we're going to start this with a presentation by NYCHA and relate it in essence. I want to introduce the various people involved, and then we'll go through it. First, we have Jamar Adams from Essence. Raise your hand, please. Greg Uche from Related Companies. And then from NYCHA, Marissa Schaefer and Simon Kowitsky. So they're going to present, and then the community board will delve into the Chelsea NYCHA Working Group report that has a much more detailed series of rights, and we'll go through them to make sure we're going through it. So turn it over to, it's going to be Simon and Marissa. Okay.
Good evening, Community Board 4. Thank you so much for having us here tonight. I'm going to go through a brief presentation, and then we'll be happy to answer questions. My colleagues from NYCHA and also from the development team are also here and can help answer any questions that may arise. Who has the clicker? Okay, we can go to the next slide. So just to give a little bit of background on the resident rights for the Fulton and Elliott Chelsea project. We went through a lengthy process with the working group over the course of several years, where the recommendation was ultimately to include these developments in the PACT program. The PACT program, as Joe mentioned, can be utilized as a tool to effectuate a number of different outcomes for public housing residents, whether that's the rehabilitation of the property, the demolition and rebuilding of the property, or anywhere in between on that spectrum. Our plan currently is to continue to use the PACT program to facilitate the rebuilding of these campuses. And in that way, many of the recommendations that were included in the working group report are still relevant to the conversation today. Of course, we need to think through all of the different situations that may arise now that we are moving forward with the rebuilding, and are looking forward to having those conversations. Yes. Okay, the proposed rebuilding, and are looking forward to having those conversations with the board and of course with our residents. So just some background on PACT. PACT uses a blend of HUD tools. Those tools include primarily the rental assistance demonstration, or RAD, and the Section 18 program. The primary benefit of these programs is that we are able to convert our public housing properties to project-based Section 8. This is another federally funded program that allows us to raise significantly more funds per unit than we currently are able to raise under the public housing program. In some cases, double the amount of funding. That allows us to better resource and staff our properties, and also it allows us to take out financing to make those upfront repairs or the proposed rebuilding. Really importantly, these tools, because they are federal programs, have really robust requirements in terms of the design and construction standards. So what we have to actually do to be able to unlock this better source of funding, whether that's rebuilding or rehabilitation. And they also require that we preserve all of the rights and protections that our residents currently enjoy. And I'm going to go through what those rights and protections are on the next slide. But just to lay some groundwork for where these requirements and these protections live in the federal regulations and law. In the blue box on this slide, I wanted to just itemize them so we all can get familiar with the framework that we're working in. So the RAD statute and the implementing notices, they really determine and drive the framework under which we implement RAD. The project-based Section 8 voucher program has a series of regulations that also include really important things like how rent is calculated. The Uniform Relocation Assistance and Real Property Acquisition Policies Act, otherwise known as the URA, includes really important protections for when a resident may be temporarily moved. The Fair Housing Act and the Uniform Federal Accessibility Standards also capture some really key requirements in terms of accessibility, anti-discrimination, among other things. These all lay the groundwork for how we can operate, the baseline rules and protections that we must follow. Public housing authorities across the country build on these rules, and we really adapt them for the local context. Again, this is the framework. We can add on to these requirements and standards and really tailor them for implementation on the local level based on the needs of the residents and the conditions on the ground. So our implementation of these programs, primarily RAD and Section 18, is called PACT. That's how we refer to our implementation of these initiatives. Now, we've continuously evolved PACT since it was first created. In 2016, the first development to convert to project-based Section 8 through the PACT program is called Ocean Bay and has been in stabilized operations for 7 years now. And before we actually closed on that project and implemented those renovations, we convened a group of residents and experts to think through how do we want to build on these federal requirements. That ultimately resulted in what we call the RAD Roundtable Guiding Principles. They set forth things that may not be captured, such as how we collaborate with residents to determine what kind of repairs are going to be made, how we notice residents about upcoming investments, how we work with them to develop things like the house rules that play a really important role in quality of life. Also, really importantly, efforts like the working group that we did as part of the Fulton and Elliott Chelsea conversations, which started in 2019 and ended in early 2021. Also started to build on those roundtable principles that were developed in those early years with the help of groups like the Legal Aid Society and CSS and others, really kind of helped us bring the program to a new level in a lot of different ways. And those recommendations are on our website. They're included in the NYCHA Chelsea Working Group report that I know the board is familiar with. And those are all of the things that kind of guide how we implement the program, from the statute and the regulations to how we've customized and tailored the program for the local implementation. But how are all of these things enforced between NYCHA, HUD, our development partners, and the residents? They're really enforced through a whole variety of different legal agreements. We have many different legal agreements that we use in these transactions on our website. They're form documents where you're welcome to look through them and ask us questions. Many of them were developed in collaboration with the Legal Aid Society as well. And we're open to suggestions for how they may improve, but they cover the relationship between NYCHA and the federal government. NYCHA, the federal government, and our development partners, NYCHA and our development partners, and also the partners and the residents on the ground. And really importantly, the tenant lease is where many of the really important protections that residents benefit from, that we're required to bestow upon them, are enforced legally. Next slide. So whenever we have a conversation about the PACT program, this is the slide that we bring because these are the rights and protections that are really important to our residents. Number one, anyone who is temporarily moved has a right to return to their unit or their development. This is a really critical protection that exists through RAD and also through the URA, which I described, and is something that we take very seriously, obviously, but is also a legal requirement. In the context of a rehabilitation project, a resident has a right to remain in their home after it's repaired. In the context of, or if they're temporarily moved because of hazardous work that needs to be done to rehabilitate their unit, they are entitled to return to their unit. In the context of a proposed rebuilding project, if they are temporarily moved, they must be allowed the opportunity to move back to their development site. Really importantly, under this program, rent is continued to be calculated in the exact same way that it is today for public housing residents. So that's 30% of adjusted gross household income. Residents, of course, have the right to organize, and the resident associations continue to receive funding. NYCHA continues to facilitate the election processes and certify the results and support our resident associations in advocating for their communities. Really critically, the lease that is signed between the resident and the management company must be automatically renewed each year. This is a benefit that NYCHA residents have. They sign their lease once when they first move into our property, and they don't have to sign it again. That is the benefit that continues to be implemented through the PACT program. Household applications are not rescreened. So what this says is that we don't look at any qualities about your income, your household size, or family composition that might otherwise disqualify you for project-based Section 8. If you're a current authorized household living in the development at the time, you are guaranteed the right to remain and benefit from the project-based Section 8 funding that we receive and all of the improvements that are coming to your home and your community. In terms of being able to add family members to your lease, so you want to add your grandparent or your child to live with you, that is still permitted under this program. The same exact permissions apply, and the same exact permissions apply in terms of succession rights. So if the head householder were to move or to pass on, anyone else who's on the lease would be able to succeed them in taking over as head of household for that apartment and continue to live there. There is a grievance hearing process for any issues that may arise between the property manager and the resident. And this program is subject to the Section 3 program. Section 3 requires that 25% of all labor hours are provided to qualified Section 3 workforce or business concerns, with NYCHA residents being a top priority. That could be in both construction or in operations. Next slide. So this kind of brings us back to where I started the conversation, and looking forward to engaging further on this subject. But as I mentioned, the working group report that was created included a host of recommendations that recognize a lot of the changes that we were making to the PACT program, but also pushing us to think about issues that maybe we hadn't been engaging on up until that point. And NYCHA committed to working to incorporate and address those recommendations and issues in its implementation of the PACT program at the Fulton and Elliott Chelsea developments. And we're going to continue to work through those. So in terms of where the working group report is today and the proposed rebuilding project, they all still apply, and where they are relevant, we are going to be working to incorporate them. Of course, I mentioned that there's going to need to be some more thinking about the new circumstances that may arise now, given the proposed rebuilding approach, and looking forward to really figuring out what those are and where we need to turn our attention to make sure that our residents are protected. In closing, I just really want to again emphasize that our goal here is to provide our residents with safe, modern housing where they and their families can live safely. This is a strategy to do that. Of course, our number one priority is protecting our residents and making sure that their needs and priorities are addressed in lots of different ways. And so we are eager to collaborate with the board and work with our residents to make sure that we're leaving no stone unturned.
Yeah, another.
We are going to.
You're talking about the, So again, I'm sorry, tonight, we're talking about tenant rights. You came in a little bit late. We're going to be taking up all those issues as we go forward. We are absolutely going to be dealing with every single issue at hand, but tonight, right, but tonight is, so Marnie, you missed what I just said, because you came in a little bit late. And we said that specifically, whether the proposal is renovation, the proposal is private renovation and construction, or all construction and demolition, the tenant rights need to apply equally to no matter what happens in the end of the day. So that's why tonight we're talking about the thing that protects the tenants the most, which is getting clarity from NYCHA and getting commitment as we go forward on tenant rights. That's our start for today. What I'd like to do is Jesse is putting up the section of the Chelsea NYCHA working group report. Caesar, you really have to be quiet so your neighbors can hear what's going on. Just got to be quiet. Whatever you do, you got to be quiet. It's got to be respectful. So now, Jesse, go ahead, put up the report. Okay. So what we need to do is go a little bit deeper, and Simon gave us from NYCHA the detail, the broad strokes, but there's a whole list of rights that we're negotiating. We want to go through these just to get some quick assent and understanding that all of these items are still in the future proposal. So let's go through further down. Keep going. So what we just saw was this from the working group report, but this has a lot of items underneath it. Keep going down. So, for example, NYCHA should seek to implement a rent cap. That was a huge issue we talked about in the working group, and I'm going to turn to tenants who were there, to Miguel who's here. All of these things are still, we want to make sure, item by item, are still in the plan. So that's the kind of issue we want to go through to understand. It's not just the broad principles as a group, and the working group member was tenants, community stakeholders, citywide stakeholders, everybody agreed and had consensus around these things. So now let's go next down. Okay. Now, ensuring that there are no fees higher than those in public housing. So if there are anything in the new developments that charge fees, not higher than public housing. Notification and comment on the possibility of sub-metering. In NYCHA today, you don't pay your electric and your gas. When it's a renovation or a new building, that's what we agree to. That there will be, right. That's what it says. That's what it says. That's what it says. Next. So then. So transfer fees, if you pay security deposits, if you pay this, if you pay that, it's going to be the same as today with NYCHA. Nothing changes. Legal protections, let's go down. A whole section about extending specific protections and a consent decree that was agreed to between NYCHA and the city of New York, right? This was deeply researched back and forth among the tenants' rights subcommittee, and this was agreed to, right? Next. Other way. That NYCHA should clarify the grievance procedures it has that exist today. So again, in the future, when there's some sort of conversion to this public-private ownership thing, that's clarified, and it's not different than what you have today. Going to the next one. If there's any lease changes, that tenants have the opportunity to comment on that before they're proposed. Right? That's a piece of it. Next. Supporting tenants have access to their rights by whatever assistance is needed. And again, the group was very serious about this to make sure people don't have their rights modified. If they do, they can get help and get help on that. Next. There is today automatic termination for permanent exclusions, tenant notification. This is all about issues regarding the legal activity that happens and people therefore cannot live in the development. It's slightly different under Section 8, and we're willing to make sure that as long as you need the Section 8 benefits, it's the same for you as it is today. Next. That there's a current clause in the leases that say your apartment is as is. Well, the whole goal here is to either have a renovated or newly built apartment, so it's not going to be as is, and getting rid of that specific language, and NYCHA agreed. Next. Oh, no, sorry. Yeah, back up, sorry. Right. So, and then there's objectionable behavior. It's in New York City law. There's a disconnect with NYCHA says. We said make it consistent with New York City law. Form requirements that there may be, they were talking about lots of different forms. People get confused and then have an issue of not being in compliance with their lease. So we talked about limiting that, going down. If an eviction takes place, you still have tenant rights and you go through the housing court to deal with it. The normal process that we deal with today that continues over into anything that happens for any proposal. Next. Mold, lead, asbestos. There's a period of time that no matter what happens with this proposal, people will be living in difficult conditions, and NYCHA and the developer, when they take over during the interim period, has to take care of those issues. If there's mold in the apartment, if there's lead, you have to deal with the normal stuff that every other tenant in the city has the right to have treated. Next. And there's a clause in the lease, if the owner can't provide service, they basically get out of it. That comes out because if you don't provide service, you have to have responsibility for it. And then the last is that there's an issue here in any sort of pact deal, meaning a conversion from Section 9, public housing, to Section 8. There's something called right sizing. That means if you're a senior citizen living in a 4-bedroom apartment, or you're a family living that's got many kids living in a 1-bedroom, you're going to be able to get to the right size apartment in this process. And we all in the community agreed that was absolutely important. It had to happen, right? And for seniors, they should be able to choose a studio or a 1-bedroom. So if you are living in a 2-bedroom, you're a senior in a 2-bedroom apartment, you are not pushed to go to a studio. We can go to a 1-bedroom if you choose. That was a big point of contention. We resolved it. NYCHA agreed. Keep going. Additional credits and background checks. Temporary relocation agreements. We knew even with renovation, people may have to move temporarily out of their apartment somewhere in the development because the work happening may be hazardous. You don't want someone in their apartment when asbestos is removed or when lead is removed. So there would be a relocation agreement. And we worked with legal aid on this to say they would work with us, get a relocation agreement that would protect the tenant's rights. Because the last thing in the world, we don't know what happened in other jurisdictions in the nation. Chicago, relocation, people disappeared, never came back. New York, people moved from the Columbus homes, never came back. Miami, all over the place. That we said would not happen here, not in our city, not in our neighborhood. Next. Then tenants' rights to move, right? This speaks to tenants moving other locations, being able to move to another, or if tenant chooses they want to move, because that happens sometimes. And during the course of our working group, somebody decided on a working group they wanted to move someplace else. So they got a Section 8 voucher and they moved. We have to preserve people's choice. That's all. But it's very much, it's a lot of detail in it, but that's what it means in essence. And then that succession rights, which Simon mentioned, that if your family is there and your family composition has changed and it's your child or your aunt is there, whatever it is, you have succession rights, just like you have in rent stabilized apartments. Same thing. And then this was rather important for everybody that, in fact, there's waiting lists for Section 8. There's waiting lists for the Section 8 that's portable to any place, or waiting list to get into something. So you actually had access to that. Because if you decide you don't want to be there, you can actually physically move and you get on those waiting lists. As we get. So let's go down. Right, okay. And we're not going to talk about occupancy standards that are more restrictive than the current public housing standards. So let's say public housing says that if you have 2 children above a certain age, you have to have separate bedrooms for them. You're not going to say you have to share a bedroom, that kind of stuff. Very, very specific and making it as tight as possible. And that is where we end on this section, right? But what we want to do is, NYCHA gave us the broad terms with this. As part of our discussion tonight, we should talk about this in general. And we will, I think the community will feel very good if, as coming out of this meeting, after all of our questions and discussion is done, that we write to NYCHA, enumerate the specific rights, not just the general principles, and have NYCHA respond back to confirm that irrespective of what the proposal ends up being, and by the way, I say tenants in the room, that which is proposed is very rarely that which gets built. There's a back and forth when we figure something out. So therefore, we want to make sure everyone is protected irrespective of what happens. There also may be additional rights that have to be figured out if there's rebuilding. That we had not considered as part of the working groups, have to think about that. And I now want to take questions to myself and or Simon on this presentation, and then we're going to hear from Lucy Movement from the Legal Aid Society about the rights. Yes, JD. Oh, Simon, just an acronym statement.
It just stands for Permanent Affordability Commitment Together Act.
Okay, thank you. I think you should put that in your slide.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank
presentation.
you.
The second question is a larger question, and it's about the guarantee that any of these will be enforced. Because as we know, in politics, things change. Even in HUD, new people, what is the guarantee? What is the enforcement mechanism? What rights do tenants have to sue if something is not fulfilled?
Before Simon,
Or has it happened before in your experience where they have not carried through on the commitment?
so first I want to know, PACT is merely the New York City Housing Authority acronym. It's not a nationwide thing at all. They came up with it. Second, what you just asked for was the bones of the committee, the subcommittee on tenant rights discussions. And we specifically asked for all the documents in which these get embodied in. And that's one of the things that was mentioned, that those are on the website, but the truth is, that's another thing we put in a letter to say, enumerate the documents, how these are enforced. Right. Committee, we're doing committee members first, committee members, and then we'll come to you. Travis? You forgot our procedure.
Well, I wasn't. You threw me.
In the instances where residents have to be relocated, is there any assistance for that relocation? i.e.
So
packing things
what
up?
I want to say is, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, because we're going to have one just about temporary permanent relocation. Like, and that's going to be deep, but that's a lot more specific. And he can say, yes, there is assistance, but I don't want to go off on a tangent. I want to stay on tenant rights tonight. Roberta.
So,
Right.
so I know that NYCHA announced that it was planning on releasing a set of its house rules. It announced that it would be doing that sometime in the near future. Will that be available prior to any agreements here so that tenants are able to understand what those house rules are and whether or not those will kind of carry over to any new proposal?
That's a good question. So our house rules, NYCHA has house rules that we apply to our tenant leases for public housing properties. We use the house rules in that public housing lease as a base for the PACT program. So that is kind of the standard. And as Joe mentioned in the recommendations, no requirements can be more, or rules can be more restrictive than currently exist. Every development has its own circumstances, different preferences, approaches to property management. And so those can be negotiated or added on to the existing NYCHA rules.
And if I may just clarify, this was specifically something that NYCHA and the New York Legal Assistance Group appear to be working on with public feedback, and it goes through all of NYCHA's properties, not just those in this neighborhood. And I was wondering if those specifically would be available for tenants to be able to see just in case that would be helpful for this process.
I believe they are. I'll look into the process that you're talking about. I may not be familiar with the latest and greatest of what's going on, but I can absolutely share the house rules that are currently attached to our lease, and I'll follow up.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Roll.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was very good, very clear. I was not familiar with it, so it was very helpful. I was struck, however, by the term right to return to their development as opposed to the right to return to their unit. So I'm wondering if development is defined as a unit of equal size, if it means also if the unit is going to be in the low floor, middle floor, high floor, are they going to have the same view as before? Can you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Sure, yeah. So there's two things that are relevant, and it really depends on whether you're taking a rebuilding approach versus a rehabilitation approach. There is, under a rehabilitation approach, what's known as a right to remain. And that means that you're entitled to remain in your current apartment if you, while the work happens in your unit. If for some reason, as Joe mentioned, the work that's going to be taking place is unsafe, like there's lead abatement or asbestos removal that needs to take place and it's not safe for you to remain in your home, we do facilitate temporary moves to other apartments within the property. Now, the RAD program requires that we allow that resident who has been temporarily moved to return to their home. And they would have a lease, and they would also have a temporary move agreement, which is attached to the lease that guarantees that right to return to their home or to remain in their home. Now, under a rebuilding scenario, that's really what that language is speaking to. You have if you are temporarily moved off-site or to another unit within the development, after your new home is constructed, your new building, you are entitled to an appropriately sized apartment in that new building. That means that the apartment size needs to match your household composition, so you have adequate space, not too much, not too little, based on your family size.
What about the floor in the building and also the views that they may or may not have now?
That's a really good question, and I haven't really thought about that. I can look into that and get back to you.
Lisa, David.
Yeah, just to follow up on that. So right sizing only counts if it's rebuilding, reconstruction.
No, rehabilitation.
Yeah.
There's also, let's I speak correctly. We wrestled with this a lot for renovation, and everyone back and forth realized if you today are a single person, your family's gone living in a 4-bedroom, and there's renovation, you would go back to a 1-bedroom, not to a 4-bedroom. That was a whole discussion that happened. Or vice versa, because the big issue in NYCHA is there's many people who are heavily overcrowded. They would be able to get a larger apartment with more bedrooms, even in rehabilitation. Yes.
Okay, and so is there specificity and agreement on what the right size apartment is for what kind of family?
There's a household size metric for apartment size metric. Yes.
Okay.
That exists in all section 8.
Okay.
So,
Can I clarify one thing about
Sure.
that? So, I actually didn't finish the thought earlier on the rehabilitation scenario. So the lease agreement and the temporary move agreement that resident would sign when they vacate the unit for the repairs to take place will entitle them to return to that home that they just left, their original home. But over time, the situation is a little bit different under a rehab scenario than rebuilding, because you're not going to have necessarily the right number of appropriately sized apartments for the households that you have. There's going to be mismatches. So what we do under the PACT program, under a rehab scenario, is we move people based on the vacant units that exist, and it happens slowly over time. So we come up with a list of priority moves, those families that are the most egregiously underhoused or overhoused, and we work to accommodate them first. So they do get to come back to their home, but over time they would be right sized.
So I want to go around the committee and then we'll go to the public. Wilson, any questions? Dolores, and then somebody.
The mic. So I just want to zoom out a little bit, and this is pretty much what you're doing is going around. One, I'm struck by how extremely thoughtful and detailed the rights are for the tenants, regardless of what ends up being happening in the project. it seems as if there has been thought about all of the issues and concerns that can be the most frightening for anyone in this position. And what the rights that are outlined is saying is, regardless of what happens, we're putting you as the tenant first in order to understand how to go ahead and make this approach less frightening. And so I appreciate that. And I just wanted to comment that it is very thoughtful and it's very thorough. And so thank you to the working group, all of you that were on it, all the tenants that engaged in it, in providing enough detail to take some of the fear out of this process.
That was about 20 people that worked in that committee to really figure this out. So Wilson, any questions? Lisa spoke, Roberta spoke. Paul, questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to quickly, PACT is a new acronym for me. I just wanted to ask, again, as Dolores said, very detailed proposal. Have we, NYCHA, building developers, have we ever done anything quite this big in quite this way?
The question is for Simon. Have you ever done demolition and rebuilding of this scale yet? Just a general question. Don't get too deeply into it, please.
Yeah, real general, sorry.
This would be the first project of the scale that we would do. We have done other rehabilitation projects with developments of this size, but not rebuilding in New York City.
I hadn't heard of anything. Thank you.
Jessica?
Yeah, thank you. I have two questions. One is, I understand currently tenants can see work status reports on NYCHA, on the NYCHA website or Twitter feed. I had read an article in the city from a few years back that said that when a building falls under RAD, a tenant's ability to see what's going on is masked. And I was wondering if you could speak to that. I think part of tenants' rights is knowing what's happening in their building and if that's still the case.
Are you referring to like a public dashboard where members of the public can see how we're responding to things like outages and work tickets? Or do you mean for the residents so they could track their?
Given that we're focused on tenants right now, my understanding was that was directly where tenants could see the progress. I think interesting.
Sure, yeah. So
dashboard as well, but
each of our partners that we work with under the PACT program have their own systems for having work requests entered and then tracked. I can look into that to see what programs and things that they use to provide more detail to the board about like how easily accessible it is and transparent. I do know that NYCHA is working to also make all of our work order and performance information available online, so I can follow up on the status of that as well.
thank you. I do think it's important. This project is anticipated to go until 2040 as a neighborhood, as the proposed project, and for people to be able to understand that progress directly related to their unit, but also to their development is something that they should have access to.
Yeah.
My second question is really about the intersection of tenants. I don't actually know how to frame this question, so maybe you'll see where I'm going and help me out. But we know in some of the buildings that we've advised on or that are in our district, there are often tenants who refuse to leave their units even when they are wholly unsafe and inappropriate. And where does the intersection between the refusal to leave and tenants' rights, and how should we be prepared to think about that and go about that?
Well, each of our partners brings that expertise, and I know that at this development, we have a group called HOU, Housing Opportunities Unlimited, that works really hand in hand with every tenant and gets an understanding of their needs, the priorities that they have for their new homes, and can definitely provide more information about what that process looks like.
So first, I think we should put in our letter that whatever work order system exists post RAD conversion should be accessible and transparent to the tenants. Should note that down as another item. Second, Jessica, specifically, under New York City law, irrespective of what kind of tenant you are, if in fact you refuse to relocate or access, the remedy in the end of the day is housing court. So I would fully expect, even with the best project in the world, where 95% of the people figure out what the proposal is that works, there will be some people who say, thank you, no. And that'll be a housing court remedy. But that's the nation. Let's go to Hector and then Maria.
Oh, and Travis.
Oh, no. And then we're going to go to the public. We're finishing up the committee.
Yeah, I just want to make a clarification here. When you discussed the housing rules before that NYCHA is supposed to follow, one of the issues we've had over the years, because I myself am a resident of Fulton Houses, is that there was a real lack of enforcement. And that was a big problem. So hence we were, moving toward a better management structure that is non-NYCHA, not at you guys, but we need someone.
We've been knocking that center for about 4 or 5 decades.
Well, I'm trying to be nice here, but anyway, regardless, it hasn't been a great experience, obviously, and that's why we've had a lot of issues with troublemakers, people illegally living in apartments that they don't have any rights to live in, or illegally renting, Airbnbs, drug activity, you can call it, and there's been a lot of lack of enforcement because of that. So the rules of always been, it's just they're going to be enhanced, obviously, moving forward, and full disclosure, everything will be available to the public. But moving forward, they're going to be enforced, and that's now.
What's the question, or is that just a comment?
That's just a comment.
Okay, good. Going to Maria. Thank you, Director. Maria.
Travis, I'll let Travis go.
Oh,
Thank you, Maria. I like the language about the right to return. I want clarification. Are there ever any instances where a tenant loses that right or has that right revoked? Never? Perfect. That's all I need to know.
go to, Pete Diaz says, yeah, put the microphone, Pete. And then we'll end with Maria, and then we'll go to the public.
Thank you for the presentation. In regards to the relocation of the tenant, what happens if the composition changes when that tenant is
During the relocation.
moved to a new location and returns? And that's one question. The second question is regarding the development, the construction of it. How will that be up to par with the NYCHA standards as historically it's been?
Two really good questions. So I want to clarify, when we're talking about right to return and households that are going to have to be temporarily moved before the new buildings are constructed, that's only going to apply to a very small percentage of the number of households that live in these communities right now. Currently, only 2 buildings will have to be vacated and demolished so that the first new building can go up. And those households would comprise only about 6% of the total apartments across these 4 developments. So I just wanted to put that in perspective, because it's not like we are proposing to temporarily relocate the entire NYCHA community at Fulton and Elliott Chelsea. Only about 100 units or so are going to have to be temporarily moved. Everybody else, the other almost 2,000 families, will move once from their current home, their current NYCHA home, into their brand new building. So that's just a clarification I wanted to make. If your household composition changes for the minority of households that do have to be temporarily moved, of course, we would be required to provide you with an appropriately sized apartment. And the new buildings that are going to get constructed are going to have an excess number of units. So we'll have some flexibility to be able to accommodate them in that new building when they do return. The quality of the buildings. Yes. Sure. Yes.
Related.
Yes.
Under development.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And, during the process that we went through with the residents at Fulton Elliott Chelsea earlier this year, we had the opportunity to tour properties that the related companies has constructed in New York City, so they could really get a feel for the quality of work that they do. And we expect similar comparable buildings to be constructed on our site. NYCHA hasn't built its own buildings in a long while. These are conversations that we're going to have with the development team and with our residents to make sure that the design of the properties, the programming, the amenities are all up to they meet our priorities and our goals for our property.
We need to know again, that's as per the current proposal, and irrespective of any proposal, it will go through a full public approval and review process, Pete, well beyond NYCHA or the tenants. It is a public review process. We're going to go to tenants now, and then we're going to.
Question, Joe.
Oh, sorry.
Um,
Oh, Maria, sorry.
I know it's easy to forget me. I'm your co-chair.
Never.
Wait, I got distracted. Sorry. Oh, yes, I remember. I wanted to say thank you for being here and presenting this information. I think it's critically important because I'm sorry, Caesar. I feel a little uncomfortable with you saying thank you. I appreciate you being here and talking about tenants' rights, because if I was one, I would want to know what my rights are, because I think if I don't know what my rights are, it is not to my benefit, right? Paul asked you a question about doing something on this scale, and the answer was no, but something similar. Oh.
Yes, this is the first way. This will be the first scale of demolition and rebuilding and expansion that NYCHA has done with the private sector developer.
I was curious about something that they have done, even on a smaller scale, but if you can mention it in like 10 seconds, 30 seconds.
This is a model that many other municipalities and housing authorities across the country have done. So there are definitely precedents for this kind of work. Just within New York City, it's for many different reasons. It's not an approach that we have yet taken, but it is common in other parts of the country.
So again, the question was, has it been done in New York City by NYCHA? The answer is no. Other places in the country, yes. Can we now start? I want to start with tenants. And then we're going to end up at the end with legal aid societies, specifically about rights and talking about what additional rights may be needed and the current rights that are there. Starting with, yes, Jackie.
I have two questions. One, what guarantee do we have that this developer will not in 10 years say that they're not federally funding us and we will have to pay market rate? And what happens then? Are we going to be guaranteed that? And number two, I had called for some information to HOU and they said that in 5 years we will have to start paying Con Ed. Is that true as well? And what right do we have with that?
So there are not going to be any new fees. So currently residents are not paying for utilities. There would not be an expectation that you would in the future. Or if you are, there'd be an allowance that's provided to your rent to compensate for those fees. The other question was about how do we have assurance that these rights are going to be enforced? That's all in the legal documentation. It's on our website and we can dig into it at a future date as well. But there are restrictive covenants that are tied to the land that actually require it to be utilized as affordable housing permanently. And there are a whole host of other legal agreements that provide recourse for NYCHA and for HUD to enforce on the developer if they ever default on those obligations.
Yeah, so I want to say this again for the public here. Again, this was discussed extensively at the working group. And specifically, NYCHA is not selling this land. They are leasing this land. And therefore, they hold the major thing with these covenants that allow them to legally enforce something. So if someone comes to you in 10 years, whether you're in a renovated apartment or in a building, and says you have to pay market rent, NYCHA, not maybe Simon, but Simon's child, will say, no, you have to do this, period. And they can start a legal action against them. Very, 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 very clear. And I want it to be in writing. I want to go get into the question of utilities. In section 8, right? There's two kinds of rents, one with utilities and one without. So if there's anything with sub, the rents would be changed because it's your total household expense every month, not just your rent, it's rent plus utilities. Very serious. Go to the next one.
Yeah. Hi, I'm the Tenant Association President of Fulton Houses. The Tenant Association and residents. So this plan 120%. Just to put the writing together. And like Joe said, this was done by outside groups, the association, residents, everybody, and legal aid to make sure that we protect it wholeheartedly. So we support it. And now I have a question for the developer.
is as he saw to make sure once this becomes was he support the rights and protections for this development proposal. As per the listed rights and the working group that were embodied in the RFP. Yeah, so we'll come to me in a second. Let's just keep going around. We'll come back. We'll come back, Miguel. We'll come back to you. Next person to speak. In the back, and then no, one in the back, then we'll come to the front.
Do I have to say my name?
Okay, when are we getting the breakdown of the 1.5 billion expense? How much is going to fix what they claim is deteriorating? How much is going into upgrades? How much into cosmetics? How much is going into the common grounds? I want to know exactly what is the proposal and how much do we need just to fix the deteriorating features of the building?
So that specific subject, we're definitely not talking about tonight, but we're gonna ask that question. We want to hear any questions about rights. That's our first thing. Hear about rights. Anybody next? Okay. Another right there, Mary, I'll come to you.
Hi, my name is Mary McGee. I'm a former resident of Fulton Houses. I was part of the working group. I know everything that went on because I incorporated myself in every subcommittee we had. I fought to the bitter end to ensure that our rights were heard. Anybody here could tell you the headaches I gave them. And I know that the rights and protections for the residents are there. We fought very hard. So if you have questions, concerns, it's there, it's in writing. And I will be the first one to fight for you if they try to change anything that's going to be negative towards you. So as for being part of the working group, seeing all the hard work, I stood there to the bitter end. And I'm just saying that our rights, your rights, I'm no longer a resident, are protected. Thank you.
I'm gonna go to this tenant right here next.
Hi, my name is Alexa Cruz, and I have a question for NYCHA. What happened to the billions of dollars for many years that were supposed to repair our buildings? Where did the money go?
I think that's again the question. That's a bigger question that we can't take up tonight. We're truly focused on tenant rights. Do we have other tenants or members of the public here who want to ask questions about tenant rights? If we do not, I also want to go to the developer who was asked a question by Miguel Acevedo, whether or not they support the tenant rights in the RFP and the workings. Oh, sorry, man.
Maria, I'm gonna let the somebody speak.
Right here. No, yeah, speak, yes.
She was asking me about what she can say.
Tenant rights.
Questions or comments about that?
Go to the back, yeah.
You could go in the back.
And then we'll go to you, then we'll go to related. That's related, that's this.
What are our rights pertaining to posting flyers in our buildings?
So RFP, we have the right to organize. It doesn't matter whether you are pro, for, against, whatever, you can organize. That is totally guaranteed.
They need to tell our project manager in our building and our maintenance workers to stop taking down our flyers. And we also know that some HOU workers have been doing it also. They take down our flyers when we try to organize.
So organizing is specific. If in fact we will talk to NYCHA, we will speak to NYCHA specifically on whatever rules must be followed, and we make sure that NYCHA will ensure that both people are in favor or against have the ability to post flyers. Okay, that's gonna be in our letter. I'd like to go to, yes, ma'am.
There's some things that I want to say, and I think that I would like for you guys to hear what I have to say. I wrote a few things down, And then I have a question at the end. So if you could give me at least 5 minutes because
We won't be able to do 5 minutes
Okay.
because I think,
2 minutes.
yes.
Okay, because I'm a resident and this is a big change for me and my family.
And we're going to time you just to tap you on the shoulder when you get to the 2.
Oh,
Okay, so you're ready.
so let me start. So good day, my name is Lachelle, and there's a saying, when you pray, you should thank God for what you have and everything he does for you, and then ask him for what you want and then need. I've lived in housing my whole life and from a newborn until now. So thank you, NYCHA, for allowing me the opportunity to have a consistent and sometimes affordable roof over my head for me and my family. However, as a toddler, I was diagnosed with chronic asthmatic due to the lead, paint, dust, and mold coming from the vents and the pipes. I recently was diagnosed with year-round allergies due to the dust buildup coming from the bathroom vents, rust in the pipes, mold from the water, damaged cabinets because of the leaking pipes, which attract and make mice and pests. Years of lead and inhumane living at the hands of NYCHA. I have had to been an exterminator to the pests, a maintenance man and skilled trade contractor for repairs needed, a janitor for cleaning my halls, and a housing assistant and an attorney. At times, I've advocated for my needs, expressed my rights, going to court for unpaid rent because I've used my rent money to do repairs or have bought in the heater and essential items for the needs that I have. With that being said, Essence and HOU have came from the beginning and told us and have took us on tours, 1 point every weekend for 2 months to see the renovations that they did at other developments. They were gonna just do the renovations for us as the residents, but we said, why don't they just give us new buildings?
Go ahead, ma'am.
So they went back to the drawing board and came up with a choice proposal of what they can offer us. And there were many, and that was many meetings ago. They asked us, the residents. Okay, 2 seconds. Please, can I finish?
No.
I have a question.
Yes, the question, please.
Let me just finish.
I-
They asked us, the residents, who was and we were indecisive and unsure what we wanted, so they hired an outside company for us to do votes. Why is it so hard to believe that most of us want to change, that we want to live good and we should live healthy and get that change?
I have to say again, I'm sorry, I stopped someone from speaking. I stopped someone from speaking. It's about tenant rights. Okay, everybody, it's about tenant rights tonight. It's a complex thing. I heard you speak at our last meeting. You were fantastic. But we have to get through item by item. And if you have a question, please ask the question.
Okay. With that being said, the questions we should be asking.
Go ahead. Go ahead, ma'am. Ask the question.
Construction is gonna, will they provide jobs for a community of people and our young people, which could be permanent, and how long is the construction is gonna be moving forward?
Okay, so the question is, as part of tenant rights, is there job provided? And the answer is yes, it's required under the whole grad conversion for a specific percentage. 25% of the jobs must be for NYCHA residents. Let's go. I want to get to Legal Aid Society. I want to say, and anybody else raise your hand if you want to speak about tenant rights. Yes.
I was wondering, I know that with the whole right sizing might take effect when, related as it takes over. Is there a way that NYCHA can start doing that before all this starts happening? Because I'm a resident, I live in Fulton. It's a family of 4 in 1-bedroom apartment. I've been on the waiting list for 12 years.
So again, I think what we're going to do is, these are the kinds of questions we're going to take up when we get to the relocation. And we're going to, so we make sure in the future we pick every item up. There's a question that was asked, in the back, yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Please, ma'am, start speaking.
Okay, so one is the tenant's rights with no demolition. That was the one. 2, NYCHA lacks accountability. How does someone who is not accountable, has not been accountable, going to make someone else accountable?
So
I want to understand that one.
So let me try to respond to that, please. That Actually, there was not a tenant right about no demolition. That was a policy decision made among everybody that there be no demolition. This is the major change. That's why there's a conflict back and forth. The tenant rights are about, irrespective of what kind of project happens, that everyone has the same protections, right? When you talk about NYCHA accountability, that's also why people have a lack of belief, because there has been a lack of accountability for decades and decades. The reason we are dealing with this rad conversion is to try to get a new idea that says, providing a bunch of legal documents, X, Y, and Z happens, right? Is it going to be perfect? Is it going to work exactly? But at least we know what's not working today is the current, I'm sorry, I say this all the time, you heard me say it, is the current NYCHA management and the ability to renovate. So I have one question, right? Maybe in the back, please. And then we're going to legal aid, please. Okay.
I would like to have 2 minutes as well. Is that possible?
No, I want to say, I want to say to everybody.
Make it clear. I want to have 2 minutes. I'll just say what I have to say. My name is Nelda Perez. I want to remind everyone, especially on the board, that rights that are outlined over here that were so nice and special were already outlined in section 9. And if you look at section 9, you can read them. We're losing a lot of rights.
We actually expanded section 9. I will tell you that. We sat on these committees, we expanded section 9 rights. I just fought against it.
It's being taken away when you have the project-based section 8. And yes, there are. Yes, there are. But let me just, I just wanted to know with the tenants' rights, why are you not allowing us to have all of the section 9 rights that we already have? I could go down the list, but if you want, I will not keep my 2.
So just so you understand, over 18 months, the section 9 rights, we expanded them because many of these things in this document are above and beyond section 9. For the members who sat on this and engaged with it, it is greater. That is a fact. And one of the things we need to get down to when we write our letter is asking NYCHA to verify and agree to that yet again, put it in writing. I want to go to another person.
I was gonna say, I think it's about time we hear from legal aid.
Yeah. I'm sorry, we got to this point. We need you from on the rights issue, and again, there's no issues. But one thing I can just note, the developer was asked, do you support the rights in this RFP and in this document? Can I please have somebody answer that from the development team, either Jamar or Greg Goucher? The answer is yes. Okay, yes.
All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Lucy Newman. I'm an attorney at the Legal Aid Society. I wanted to thank the community board for having me here today and to thank Joe for asking me to be here to talk about residents' rights and protections. I just wanted to give you a little bit of background. So I've been at Legal Aid since 2004, working on tenant defense issues for many years, doing eviction prevention. And then in 2011, started really focusing primarily on public housing law and policy and all of the things that go on at NYCHA, both locally, federally, and with the city. And so I've been, very involved in many different iterations of different plans that NYCHA has come out with over many years to try and preserve NYCHA and to get repairs made. I was also co-chair of the Resident Rights and Protections subcommittee in the working group. As was mentioned, we met weekly for over 18 months, every Tuesday until the pandemic shut it down, and then we would do Zoom meetings. I don't know if any of you here know Brian Honan from NYCHA, but every Tuesday when I would leave my family to go to the Hudson Guild to make these meetings, I think that my partner thought I was either having an affair with Brian Honan or learning a foreign language that I was going to suddenly come back and be fluent in, or learning a dance move, or going to secret therapy sessions. Well, it turns out I was part of, and very proud to be part of, the working group that came out with recommendations and the report that came from that. So as said, we met over 18 months. There was so much analysis during that working group of information, data, we considered different scenarios. We set up 3 subcommittees that were filled with experts on those areas: finance, rights and protections, and resident engagement. And then we all came together to give our recommendations based on the information we had at the time. Just wanted to reiterate what Joe mentioned, which is that at the time that we did the report and the process of coming to these recommendations, demolition was not on the table at all. In fact, the working group was brought together because NYCHA had released a plan that called for demolition, and there was obviously community outrage about that, and so the working group was formed. So I just really need people to understand that when we came up with some of these recommendations, it was never with a view to demolition. And also Joe mentioned, and I think somebody else mentioned, that legal aid definitely has been part of negotiating relocation agreements in other PACT conversions. Again, never with the backdrop of demolition. So it's just really important that people understand that demolition really does kind of change what's going on here. There was a survey that was administered earlier in 2023 in the spring. And I think I just need to make it clear that legal aid still stands by the fact that we really truly do not believe that this was a resident-led process that got to the decision to this demolition. But moving on, I want to talk about demolition and relocation. And that's really important because with the current proposal, and again, it is a proposal that's been made by Related Essence and NYCHA, it calls for the demolition of 2 buildings. One that is a senior-only building with 85 seniors. I'm getting to the right.
Miguel, I would like to say right now that I am going to ask Nikki to make a connection to rights.
Yeah.
And if she does not make a
I'm just doing an introduction.
Exactly.
You better not.
By the way, I want to know.
Miguel.
I apologize to people. If I let people go on too long and straighten the tenant rights, I apologize to you on behalf of community. So I'm going to ask Lucy now to make the connection.
Yeah.
If I'm making the connection, I will stop her.
I'm much stronger than Joe. Okay, so I just want to point out that demolition does introduce a whole host of different issues. We came to the table, we negotiated residents' rights and protections, and that's all good. And as they said, they're standing by them, which is what they agreed to do in the RFP anyway. But with demolition does introduce a whole new venue, an avenue of rights and protections that need to be addressed. And so
I'm sorry, we got to stop. A lot
of people spoke. A lot of people spoke about the right to return, and the right to return is a guaranteed right under the federal law. But the thing is, once you've demolished someone's housing, we do need to think through the iterations of what it's like to return to a place that no longer exists. These are all things that can be discussed and need to be discussed. But that is where the rights come in, Miguel, because if you are a senior living in addition and you are about to have a bulldozer take down your apartment, you need to have a right to return that is absolutely enforceable and ironclad. So that's really important, and it's really important that the community understands that and that everyone comes to the table to understand how to deal with that.
I just want to say one thing so you hear it. What Lucy just said is that the nature of how you protect the rights of demolition and return is somewhat different. So no matter what, we have to make sure that no matter what, we have to make sure that language is in any document that protects that ability. So no matter if you're for or against, we have to put that language in, right? And I'm sorry for things because there's someone speaking over us.
Can people hear me or should I? Okay. So I think. So the point is, we do need to have a discussion about demolition because demolition wasn't discussed before, and everyone deserves to talk about it and find out information about it and come to their own conclusion and or be part of a discussion around how to protect those rights. And I think So that's something we should look at. For example, the seniors are going to be moved not once but twice. And they're going to be out of their apartments for at least 3 years. And things like that need to be spoken about in order to ensure that people are protected. So I don't want to take up too much more time. I want to say that we're very, very happy to get into the details. A lot of the questions that people asked here tonight were the kind of things that I am so happy to talk endlessly to people about and work through. I'm not going to do that tonight because I think, like Joe said, this is going to be a long process. But I just wanted to say that there are lots of different little points that need to be thought about and then worked out where to be put in what agreement between whom so that it's enforceable and can be acted on by parties that are impacted by it. And then basically, I just want to say again that residents don't need to be grateful for the assurance that the pact rules and guidelines and protections are going to apply. They apply under federal law. And yes, we have expanded them through the roundtable and then through the working group, but they've already been committed to. What needs to now happen is there needs to be a shift in focus if this proposal continues to be discussed, and obviously that we don't know that. It needs to shift to relocation and the right to return. And everyone owes that to the people in this community and their neighbors and the people that live in those apartments. But anyway, we're here obviously to answer any questions that people may have. And we're always happy to answer questions.
Now, I want to go, we forgot a couple of things. One is, I apologize. I passed over Marnie Halassa. She raised her hand. She didn't get to speak. Everyone who needs to speak will get 1 minute, not 2 because of our time. And there are 2 speakers online, 1 minute. Okay, so that's 3 more minutes. I ask everybody to be calm and to be respectful to try to get those 3 minutes of these people speaking. Marnie Halassa is next, and then we're going to go to Mike Noble and who else? Yes. Right, so Marnie Halassa, 1 minute.
Okay,
So
okay.
we have to get out of here tonight. We have other items. Yes, go ahead.
Okay, just real quick.
On tenant, is that on tenant rights? Please tell me it is.
It is.
Good.
CB4 needs to understand that there are very few safeguards for NYCHA residents once it becomes privatized. Information by the Government Accounting Office shows that HUD has neither the capacity nor the plans to fully monitor RAD sites and to see if they conform to any agreement. 6 of 14 focus groups of tenants that went through RAD, residents in 11 of the 14 focus groups complained about property management by private real estate companies. Of the 26,000 households affected by RAD, 57% had a rent increase. Also, the National Housing Law Project reports that under RAD, new corporate managers and owners illegally interfered with tenants' ability to organize, illegally rescreening tenants for readmission and illegal eviction. So that's one thing. The other important thing is that HUD claims RAD was leveraging $19 in capital for every $1 of public housing.
Is that about right?
It's actually, it's 23 cents, not $19. This is all information that you can get on.
So again,
It's the Government Accounting Office and the National Housing Law Project. That completely obliterates this whole.
we're talking about tenant rights, and we're going to go to Mike Noble online. And any you get to speak tonight, you will have opportunities going forward without question. Mike Noble.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity here, Joe. I'm a tenant at Elliott Houses. I was also part of the working group, the RFP subcommittee, the further subcommittees that I'm still on the tenant review committee. And I can tell you that I have faith in everything that's happening here in terms of folding new concepts into the tenant rights and protections that arise out of this relocation business, okay? One perspective that I haven't shared with you all is that, these tenant rights and protections, once you have to resort to housing court, it's a tough process. So it's going to be the same, regardless whether it's Essence or NYCHA or whatever. And the distinction here, what's that? Yeah.
You have 10 seconds.
Yeah, well, the distinction that I make, what gives me comfort here, is that I'm looking for a more compassionate landlord. And I think Essence and Related are such in place of NYCHA. That's my thought, okay?
Again, our goal is tenant rights tonight, and I want to say a couple of things. As we conclude this part of the discussion, and then we're going to go to getting a motion from the committee to vote to write a letter. Everybody who came tonight, I thank you for being so dedicated to it, being so full of emotion and being angry when you want to be angry. But our meeting tonight in discussion was so good because even though there's back and forth, we heard each other for the majority of the meeting. And I really thank everybody, no matter what side of this you're on, to come to this and to understand our job, joining as a community, is to slog through these things one by one. I believe this was the easiest discussion that we're having tonight, because let me ask for just a quick show from the public here. All those who heard all about this tenant rights, who is in favor of maintaining these rights, these expanded rights? Just raise your hand, please. Right, there we go. So step one in a real heavy mess coming forward. I would now like to take, I would now like to take a motion from the committee. Expanded them. And now it's something to write. So can I take a motion from Dolores on our first substantive letter now about the Chelsea NYCHA proposal?
That's not fair.
Regarding tenant rights specifically.
Yeah.
From the
Marnie,
tonight.
please. So I'm making a motion to support the tenant rights as outlined, including the additions that we added, again, focusing on that the purpose of supporting the tenants' rights is to ensure that regardless of any project that comes to fruition, that we are making sure that every single tenant understands what their rights are and exactly how they'll be protected.
And so that would include the expanded tenant rights from section 9 to section 8. But additionally, the issue that legal aid raised tonight, anything that has to do with any possible relocation, additional rights that we did not consider because we did not consider demolition. Give me a second. JD?
Was it second? Did somebody second?
Roberta seconded, yes.
But I just add that one of our further points of inquiry is the enforcement of these rights, and we need to explore that further and ensure that.
Yes, and what's happening is the committee chairs of land use and housing are developing a longer agenda, and we're definitely gonna put enforcement on it. All those in favor of the motion on the floor, please raise your hand. I'm sorry, sorry, well.
So if we could, as a friendly amendment to you,
Careful.
a clarification on the right to return to the development. I
Yes.
seem to be troubled by that term. You know, what floor, what the, the size of the panel.
We're gonna tap for all these items. So now that we have a motion on the floor, can I ask all those in favor on the committee or in favor, please raise your hand. All those against? All those present not eligible? Present not eligible? Active? Right, I'm abstaining. So that motion carries, and I want to thank the public who came in tonight from the hot, sweaty room as we talk to each other, and we're going to keep on talking to each other. We're moving down to our second item, which is a presentation from the Learning Center, and we're going to ask you to maybe fly through some of your slides.
This one is. Okay, good evening. My name is Dan Pitchinson. I'm the executive director of the Ryan Chelsea Clinton Community Health Center. We're going to pivot to healthcare in the district. I have many slides, but Jesse, I'm going to go quick. So. Yeah. She's doing her social worker, like, get yourself to.
So you can go to the next slide, Jesse. I appreciate it. So as I said, I'm the executive director of the Chelsea Clinton Community Health Center. We are located at 645 10th Avenue, which is 10th Avenue between 45th and 46th Street. You can go to the next slide. We were founded in 2001. It's no problem. We're named after Congressman William F. Ryan, who was a congressman from the Upper West Side. You can go to the next slide. So this is our vision and our mission. We provide high quality, affordable, comprehensive, appropriate healthcare services to medically underserved. So as you may be aware that regardless of one's ability to pay, we will treat everybody who comes through our doors, whether you have public insurance or whether you have no insurance. Next slide, Jesse. If anybody has any questions, because I'm going fast, please feel free. I see like people are like, no, keep going to. So as I said, next slide, Jesse. That's where we're located in our hours. Next slide. Jesse, you can go to the next slide. So I just want this slide just tells you that about 80% of our patients who come to our center live within CB4. So we just want people to be clear that our patients live within the district that we're serving. So we are a true community health center. Next slide, Jesse. Next slide. Obviously, these are the services. So people with primary care, pediatrics. People don't often know that we have dentistry, though there's a very, very long wait for it. We have eye care. Obviously, we have HIV services because we have PrEP and PEP. We have opioid treatment services. We have gender affirming care, which is a new service line for the individuals who need who identify as trans, who need health services. We've recently developed a partnership with Fountain House, and we offer psychiatric services, which is severely unmet need for those without insurance or those who have public insurance. So we're very proud that we're able to do that. During the COVID pandemic, individuals did not get vaccinated for their kids. The rates in the United States are not good. So we're encouraging everybody to get vaccinated or encourage their children to be vaccinated. Next slide, please. So we have mental health and behavioral health integration, as I mentioned, psychiatry, screening for depression. We have therapists, group therapy, medication management. Next slide, Jesse. So Healthy Steps is a new grant that we just received from the New York State Department of Mental Health. So this is a evidence-based program that helps pregnant women, young families by providing therapeutic assistance and counseling. It's proven to provide better outcomes for children who receive the interventions, that they have better health outcomes, better vocational outcomes, and less interactions with the criminal justice system. So we just got funding through this, and we're in the process of rolling this out right now. Next slide, please, Jesse. Addiction services. So we have universal screening, medication-assisted treatment, as I mentioned, and some tobacco cessation groups. Next slide. HIV services, so we have dedicated HIV primary care specialists, case management, PrEP. We've re-engaged with the neighborhood doing outreach and engagement events, going to bars, talking to people about how to have safer sex, also what PrEP and PEP is. As people may know, 1 out of 2 African-American young men who have sex with men are HIV positive in our city. That is something that's unacceptable. And we as a community health center are working to try to educate groups to understand that. Next slide, please. As I mentioned, we are working very, individuals of trans experience have life expectancies of 25 years less than individuals who are not identified as trans. So we are trying, we've rolled out a gender affirming care health service line with comprehensive primary care, hormone replacement therapy. We've also done a lot of education within our team members to ensure that they are not stigmatizing or re-traumatizing individuals who are identified as trans. So it's something that we've done post-pandemic. The number of trans individuals seeking healthcare at our center is 350% higher than it was in the last 2 years. Calamore is another provider in our district, but they are pretty full in taking new patients. So it was an unmet need that we identified, and we're trying to fill the gaps. Next slide. We do cancer screenings, so we have a dedicated mammography van that treats people who don't have insurance to make sure they get their mammographies. We have a navigator who helps people understand what they need for colon cancer screening, and we'll take people to appointments if they have no one to go with them. Next slide, please. We also have benefits. There's been a study that shows that people's health is actually only 25% of their time with a doctor, that there's other things called social drivers of health. So you can see your doctor, but if you don't have enough food, or you don't have enough money, or you don't have access to a phone or other benefits, the impact of the doctor's office visit is not as significant. So we partnered with many organizations. If you walk by the center, Hell's Kitchen Cupboard is there 4 days a week, giving out food. And we have light phones outside. So we don't see ourselves as just a doctor's office, but as a community wellness center. And we're continuing to move in that direction. Next slide. I'll skip this one in the interest of time. Next slide. So we also have free dance and free cardio classes. As I mentioned, we're a wellness center, even though we're a community health center. So we've had people come in. We've restarted these post-pandemic. We've had people come in and say, these are better than the ones I pay for at a certain place in the district, but I'm not going to name that place. So they're back. So we encourage everybody and spread the word to your neighbors. And we used to be 5 days a week. Before the pandemic, we're shooting to go 5 days a week again. Next slide, please. So Carla Russo, who's here in the front, she's our community relations and external affairs, and she's just awesome. So next slide. And these are just some of the things that we participated in the neighborhood: National Night Out Against Crime. Our food has roots. Go ahead, next slide, because you know the time. So community wellness fair at Mount Sinai West. God's Love We Deliver, we helped, and at a back to school event we had a couple weeks ago, I think we had over 200 children who came from the district who got backpacks, books, and other things that we were able to provide for free. Next. So you can go online and schedule if you have access to that. Next slide, please. Kiosk, next slide. So this is growth, and I just want to talk about this, is that you can see the slope of the curve in the last 3 years, in spite of the pandemic, is that in our district, even though there's been many changes, the number of individuals who are underserved or receiving public assistance or receiving or have no insurance is growing tremendously. We are full. We have almost every exam is being used at almost every hour that we're open by a provider seeing a patient. So the demand is continuing to grow within this district for our kind of services. And next. So I also want to talk a little, just briefly, about the asylum seeker impact, because the asylum seekers first came to our neighborhood through the Port Authority, and then some hotels that were moved into shelters. I don't think anyone expected the degree or the magnitude at the first beginning. So this is the number of new patients. It's just grown tremendously for us. It's put a big stress on our systems, but we're rising to meet the challenge, but it continues to stress us. Go ahead. Next slide, sorry. Thanks. So I also want to say is that what we used to see in our health center in our neighborhood was not a lot of children. We saw it tended to skew older adults. We also saw a large LGBTQ+ population. Now with the asylum seekers, we're seeing a tremendous number of it's an explosion of pediatric patients. So we actually hired a pediatrician and a half to try to meet that demand. But many of the asylum seekers are coming and either having children or have many young children with them. So it's something that we're trying to tackle because it's very new for us. Next slide, please. So this is just the growth of visits that has happened. Next slide, please. So opportunities for growth. So as I mentioned, there's a high demand for prenatal services. It's not something we've done before. So we are looking to, we don't have prenatal services at our center. Most people in our neighborhood go to Mount Sinai West. Mount Sinai West has told us that for people on Medicaid or who are uninsured, that they're almost at capacity or at capacity. So they're looking for help from community partners. So we are just hired, I found out today, an OB person who will be part-time at our center. But being, we need an ultrasound. It costs $30,000. We don't have that kind of money, honestly. We will try to find it through other ways, but I know that the community board can list priorities, and we would like the community board to recommend to the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene that capital equipment or machines for medical services be brought into the district, and particularly targeting women who are underserved. The rates of child mortality in BIPOC women is horrendous in our country. Even in our state, it's worse than it should not be like this in an industrialized country of our wealth. I'll just leave it like that. We're also looking for funding to support asylum seekers. So as of last week, we had spent double what we did in all of last year for interpretation services. It's absolutely required, obviously, to provide high quality and cultural, linguistic, and understand people's experience. I think we spent now $150,000 to date. Last year, we only spent $70,000 for the entire year. So we would also ask the board to consider asking for dollars to support translation and interpretation services to community health providers. It's being dollars from the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene. Or potentially the mayor's office of immigration affairs. And I just want to mention that we're pretty much at capacity, as I said. Unfortunately, the wait to get an appointment has increased. Like you used to have a goal that everybody could be seen within 2 or 3 days if they were a new patient, and pretty much if they were ongoing care. Because of the number of people who are seeking services in our district, for primary care, it's now up to 6 to 12 days, which is terrible because if you're sick, to have to wait 6 to 12 days, you're either going to go to the emergency room, and which is clogging up resources that are not necessarily appropriate. Maybe you're admitted if you wait too long. Another thing, primary care is critical. So, this is not necessarily a financial ask, but just a community ask. And some people on the board have been very, very helpful already. Is we're looking for additional space to expand. We're also looking for additional space, and we're working with Fountain House a little bit. Mental health services are a tremendous need, just walking on our streets of our district. Plus, in the post-pandemic, the rates of anxiety, depression, and other mental health issues is significantly increased, especially among adolescent and pediatric populations. So we need space to have therapists to address with this. So those are ways we ask: prenatal services, capital for prenatal, or dollars to support capital for prenatal services, translation services, and space for mental health and primary care to support the individuals in this district. So I can take questions.
And I appreciate the comprehensive, very specific asks, because that's what we need. But I'm surprised that the list is so small. And even though we may know that we may not get everything we ask for, it's also helpful to know what is on your wish list, because sometimes putting things on the wish list at least gets the attention from that agency or elected. So I'm hoping that at some point you can come back within the next week with some other items that may be helpful for the budget committee, the budget task force, to at least advocate for, even if we don't get them.
Absolutely. We have a huge list of needs. As you know, underserved, just there's not enough money that's placed in the priority is not there necessarily.
And I would add to that, to also specify from which agency, for example, the ultrasound machine, the 30,000, if you could clarify from which agency you would need that money.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
Wonderful presentation, and you're doing great work in the community, so I just want to thank you. I just have a couple questions. It showed in the first slide when you're showing range of services that women's health and HIV primary care, there's a number of services that it says only through telemedicine or asterisks. Is that in addition to in person?
So I think it's
instead of?
No, instead of it, you can get those services either in person or through telehealth.
Perfect.
Sorry.
Perfect. And then for the prenatal care, when you do it, are they going to be delivering at Mount Sinai West and they're happy to take them?
In general, yes, most likely, because Mount Sinai is trying to make Mount Sinai West the main delivery. I don't want to say hub, but their main site of deliveries throughout their system.
For everyone or Medicaid?
Really for everyone, I think they're trying to. I can't really speak for Mount Sinai, sorry.
And then do you, as the social determinative health service, social service, do you enroll people in WIC?
Yes, we do have access to WIC. We have a women and children's center that's up about 100th in Amsterdam, which has a very big WIC enrollment program. Our navigators are trained, and a lot of it can be done online actually right now. So
By phone, they can enroll them by phone because the new migrants are eligible.
yes, exactly.
Okay.
I just want to help you handle your point about prenatal care for BIPOC folks. Black women have the highest mortality rate in giving birth. It's worse than third world countries. And I'm sure that the Latino population is going to see you as close to that as well. If you could bring numbers that support that as far as the people that the demographics that come through your doors, I think that will help drive home your argument even further.
Thank you. We can do that.
Two comments. One of all, you're doing a great job with the community, partnering with the local block association, precinct council, very much appreciated. Secondly, looking for space, I suggest that you get some figures of square footage, what you need. Joe is on the land use committee. Dolores is on the land use committee. When the related company comes to us, we can use some extortion to get something, but I think you should.
I will not comment on that one based on the previous presentation.
I'm serious, make numbers and what you need and give it to us, might help.
Absolutely.
I'm sorry. So for example, as part of the proposal, the companies have proposed to have a for-profit healthcare provider come to Chelsea NYCHA. So this kind of stuff is just all over the place. We know the good work you do. Getting the asks out early on every aspect is really helpful for us.
Thank you. We'll do that. I don't know if we are not for profit. Federally qualified health centers, we do not make any profit. We try to break even.
Thank you for the great work your clinic is doing. My children, and I'm sure many of our community children were involved in clinics for a long time. A question concerning children in the pediatric community. Do you have, how many therapists do you have on staff for infants and?
Right now we have 5 LMSWs or LCSWs.
Okay. Is there, I mean, obviously there would be probably a need for more, correct? I mean, where would be an ideal number of staff? If you
So we can space, we cannot hire social workers fast enough. So obviously it's been our partnership with Founders. Within 7 weeks, we filled up all the psychiatric items, and now we have a waiting list of a couple months. We started a group for like 3 things to try to help people bridge, but it's very difficult. I think us and Hudson Guild are the only large psychiatric providers in the district.
So it's a matter of funding. Is it a matter of funding as well? I mean, obviously for the therapist.
It's mostly space funding and assets. That's mostly honestly space.
Gotcha. Okay, thank you.
We've got some great social workers.
Any other questions for Dan?
Just quick one, I'll join the unanimous regard for your organization. We all really appreciate it. And this is sort of off the page, but whenever we get around with other runners of healthcare community-based services around the city, does the subject, do you hear anybody out there, any of your fellow healthcare guys say, well, it's sort of tight out here in Queens, At least we're not Hell's Kitchen. My God. The reason I ask is we get so much more than our share of asylum seekers, the homeless when they were taken out of cover. I just like to imagine that it might be hopeful if you added a voice to that chorus of what I hear all the time, which is we're just getting more than our share. If you spread it around, it wouldn't be quite so onerous.
Yes, I think there's certain neighborhoods, Central Harlem has been there, like going 124th, 125th Street. They have similar sentiments to what we just expressed. So we have been so they're part of active movements to have the city look at that. Yes, the disbursement of social services across our city is something that needs to be looked at very closely, and we will gladly, as a social justice organization, we will gladly lend our voice to that. How central like out of the one poverty, it's a movement. And yes, over time we cover advertise because we expect we get a lot of money, but most of us go on this because of our passion, and yeah, so yeah, we would love to participate.
If we have no more committee members, I would suggest that as part of our budget discussion, we take up some of these items that Ryan brought to us. So Dan, thank you so much for coming tonight and doing the presentation, and thank you for being as brief as you could, considering what happened before.
No worries.
Appreciate it. Thanks.
Thank you very much.
We're going to Roberta.
Just because we have not written a letter specifically enumerating the requests from Ryan Health, do we have to do that prior to then making those requests within the statement, the budget process?
No, because normally during the budget process. During the budget process, people come to us all the time, ask for something, and then we include it in it. So let's go to the capital. Thank you so much. If you want, yeah, you don't have to stay, but trust me. Oh, Roberta again. I'm sorry.
Roberta, do you have it on your computer? I'm having a little trouble. The capital.
Maybe Jessica has the screen.
Yeah, if we can.
Jessica, put on the screen. The capital list.
Yeah. Yeah, I have it.
Same goddamn process.
Joe needed it a little enlarged and yeah, it can't be that small for him.
Jessica's gonna try to put it on the screen so those who are attending remotely can see it.
Yeah, that would be great. That's a better idea. I forgot we're on Zoom. In the meantime, I sent everybody on the committee an email giving background information about this process. When I first joined, I didn't really understand it, so that's why I created this and sent it out beforehand. I would want to read it, but in the thinking about how much time we have, I'm not reading it. You also, this is public information. They can read it online. All right.
Jesse's working on getting it on the screen.
In the meantime, who's going to begin the conversation on the capital items? Joe or Roberta, because you're on the task force.
Let's share it back and forth. Okay. So let me do capital, you can do expense, right? But I need to have it closer so I can see it. No, this is a document. No, now it's I can see this part. Please, relax. Okay, so I need to see the rankings. Yeah. It's not, okay, we can't get to column A in the spreadsheet. Oh, certainly.
Okay, that's great.
Excellent. Okay, so.
Make it bigger if you want.
Yes, so our priority number one, that's fine. Priority number one is providing more special needs housing for households specifically at Hartley House. That's priority number one. Priority number two, other affordable housing program requests. You have to read this, as I'm totally conflicted out on these two.
Okay, so on the next two, we have providing adequate capital subsidy for, shouldn't be standing here, the multifamily preservation loan program and the senior affordable rental apartments for 560 West 52nd Street and 464 West 25th Street. as well as 500 West 52nd Street. The next request is the elevators at Harborview Terrace. This is a replacement as they continue to break down. And then,
is everyone aware where Harborview Terrace, NYCHA is? 55th to 56th Streets between 10th and 11th.
we've got another Harborview request, 525 West 55th Street to prioritize funding for roof repair, boiler upgrade, new building entrance and emergency exit doors, as well as the retiling of all building common areas.
And we have, Jesse, have you been able to find out what if this request has been funded yet? Jessica called NYCHA about Harborview to find out what's been funded, because sometimes in the process, we don't get full information. We ask for something, but part of it's been funded, so we want to clean it up so it's clear. Yes, the next item is the slaughterhouse, and this we must clean up, Jesse, because it is funded, it is approved, the ULURP was done, and OMB's responses, this request requires further study. Although this has been entirely approved by every level of city government. The next one is, oh, I see. Homeless shelters and surroundings. I'm looking at the capital document, and this is continuing support now, right? It's actually funded. We move it from a priority down to continuing support. We do have a family shelter at 440 West 41st Street, and that is funded. And now we're asking for continuing support. The response from OMB said it has been funded, so I think we should remove it this year. Was the response? Because we wanted it, we got it, and it's funded. Yes.
I suggest that we don't go through all the continuing support, and that's work that can be done at the task force. I think the most important thing is for the committee to agree upon the priorities and to add any additional concerns that we've heard through the year that we need to add. And the only thing that I recall that we wanted to add under capital would be what we just heard, equipment for Ryan for ultrasounds, and hopefully he comes up with some other equipment that they may need.
So a quick note, I think, everyone raise their hand if we want to add the Ryan ultrasound request? Yes, okay. And no, I said ultrasound request, but they have to give us something first before we add it. So we asked them for additional capital requests. We have to see what it is. Okay. You are definitely peeing on that.
Yep, this is Maria saying I'm P&E on that.
I'm sorry, do we have any board members that are also online?
Yes, we have Mike. Is Mike still online? Mike Noble?
He's not on this committee.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry.
Is Betty still online?
I don't see Betty. Betty has withdrawn. Okay. So again, it's ultrasound plus other capital things that they give us. And that's going to be a low cost. That should be up towards.
Sorry, so I propose you had gone through the 4 items ahead of that, which are ones that are have been on our list for a while. None of them are new. If all of us have already reviewed that document, I'm hoping that we could, as a committee, confirm that these are still our priorities. And if anyone thinks that one of them needs to move up in order, that we should discuss that. And that's pretty much all I think that we would need to do.
Yes. So any questions, JD?
Thank you, Dolores. Sorry, Ryan Center needs more money. Obviously, we heard that tonight. Is there any request to somebody to more funding for Ryan?
Yes, we just voted on that.
Well, I thought that was a specific item.
It'll be capital for that item and then other items that they give us.
Gotcha, thank you.
So I would propose, considering that the current Ryan capital request is not that large, that we move that to the top. This is such a small ask. And even if they come back with more equipment, items that are less than $100,000 in these asks are, Harley House is millions. So I think we could ask for that to be elevated.
Joe,
No.
a contrary sort of point of view. It needs to go up in order, but I don't think it should be at the top because what we have at the top is vital as a, we may not get it, but it's vital.
What do you propose?
What was the, sorry, Maria, were you at the, Maria and Roberta, were you at the task force? So, oh, sorry.
Yes.
Since I was not at that meeting, would you be able to provide your opinion about where we place those?
So in the discussion that we had, while we have not received these this year's survey relating to community priorities, in past years, affordable housing has been the #1 district priority, and the task force anticipates that that will continue. So being able to list those at the top, but after affordable housing would ultimately, it would likely reflect the community priorities there.
So somewhere under the major affordable housing development. Somewhere under the major affordable housing developments, we would put the Ryan ask for the capital equipment. And then make a recommendation and the task force will sort it all out. I'm going to turn, so given that, Jessica?
I think, I'm hoping that at the budget task force meetings, we'll also, we always, obviously, we're interested in the survey results from the community, but we're also interested in being responsive to the moment, whether that was education and remote work due to COVID. I'm hoping that we can have in our budget request some things that are specific to the migrant crisis or the influx of individuals. And I think that would allow for an opportunity to elevate this ask in particular, given what we heard, the recent rise of needing people coming to Ryan as a result of being new arrivals here. So it may not always be at this place in our list, but hopefully that can also offer some rationale for why it would be higher, given this is the moment.
And as they stated, this may be because of immigrant services, not just THMH. Travis?
Same thing. I'm curious about that request about real estate, or I know space. I know it's kind of the this conversation, but is there a way to build in a prioritization for that?
I think we take it up another community. I've had extensive discussions with them about it, and I'd like them to come and talk about this in detail. He touched on it, but there's a lot more to that story.
That's fine.
Yeah. Given that change, are we on the capital budget side in favor of including that below the affordable housing section? All those in favor, please raise your hand. All those against? Present not eligible. And abstaining. Great. Pass it to Roberta.
So these are expense budget priorities. So I'll just run through those. The #1 on this list is to provide more housing for special needs households. And OMB, the request requires further study, other affordable housing program and requests adequate capital subsidy. Sorry, I am now reading the capital and not the expense. My apologies.
Welcome to my world.
I have it. So the first is from Department of Homeless Services, expanding street outreach. And this references the impacts of COVID. The request has already been funded according to the agency. The second here is to HRA to provide, expand, or enhance rental assistance programs and vouchers for permanent housing. The city has responded and saying that there was an expansion, DHS shelter system and permanent housing have been funded, and the request has already been funded. For the next one, there is other housing oversight and emergency programs to increase HPD funding for the emergency repair program to ensure landlords do not allow their properties to deteriorate. The agency agreed to this request. Other public housing maintenance, this is specific to the NYCHA elevators. And the agency noted that it required further information on this request. increased home delivery meals for seniors from the Department for the Aging. And the agency agrees with this request, will accommodate in part. The next is from Department of Health and Mental Hygiene, the animal and pest control requests, rat and mosquitoes specifically, and the agency agreed with the request. They cannot accommodate. And then there is another expense budget request from HPD, additional funding for housing and tenant organizers for housing conservation coordinators. The agency indicated they did not have funding for this request. The next is to provide more information and services related to STIs, HIV, AIDS, and family planning. And the agency agreed with this request, but could not determine funding at this time. And then our final item on the list is from HRA, other homelessness prevention program. This was for funding supportive services for families and adults currently and soon to be exiting the shelter system. And the agency indicated that the request had already been funded.
I just want to know historically, we have never seen so many of the agency agrees with this request and only a few of them not being funded. Dolores.
So these are all requests that may have been funded or at least stated that they agree, but the problems have not gone away. So obviously I'll join the next task force meeting, but my strong suggestion from this committee is regardless if we've been told they've been funded, they need to be on the list because the need is still there. That's my view from what we're still seeing in the community. And I think that the request for funding for translation services, sorry. That was lost in translation. For translation services for the Ryan Center needs to go on the list. And I think that may be something that the task force determines where that fits. Because again, I think it'll stick out anyway, because it is something new. I don't think the priority is going to hurt it that much.
So I would move for the items that say they agree with this request and they're funding them. Oh, I'm sorry.
Sorry, just not to throw something in this, but the affordable housing request is very important, of course. But that takes time. The request for more funding for Ryan Center is immediate and an urgent, as they saw on that chart, it's rising and rising. It's about people's lives. Shouldn't that be a little ahead of it, or am I, or not?
No, because that's the capital request we voted on already. We're now on the expense side, which is, and we didn't get a request from Ryan about funding for staffing at all. We didn't hear that tonight. Right, for that, of course, for that, yes. Yeah. Right, that would, Jessica's or in Doris's note is that in this list, which are expense budget, we would include the interpretation, the translation services.
Raul just remind us, they also asked for to provide services for the asylum children, specifically children.
Right, so I think, but I first want to know, for the items that the agencies have responded, they are funding these requests. We need the ones that they're funding, and they've agreed with the funding, they're going to continue to support. For the ones that they said they're agree with but not funded, they move up in the list because obviously we want them to get funded. And then we add two more items. One is the translation services, and the other one is for services for children through Ryan. That would be an addition that has not appeared before in our list. Is everyone assent with that?
They also indicated additional funding requested for maternal health.
Yeah. I'm going to say pretty much what we heard tonight. I watched the heads, people were like nodding like this. But in terms of the basic function, if it's been agreed to and funded, continuing services, agreed to but not yet funded, push it toward the top. And then these new items also put in, and then have this reconcile from the budget task force as they wrestle with everything else as expense. Yes, Dolores.
I hate to keep harping back on this, but my concern is when we drop down to continuing support, we don't really acknowledge that this is something the community still needs. And I think, Jessica, you're right, that we need to also see what comes back from the surveys to get a real sense of those priorities. But we're still seeing unresolved issues that those budget requests that are being funded are settling. So maybe this is a conversation that should happen at the budget task force, but I'm just saying to the committee that, I think that we may want to even recognize the problems are still problems. So maybe it's a new request for funding for exactly the same thing, so that we don't just let the agencies off the hook and thinking they've taken care of it because they funded it for last year's budget.
We might want to know from the budget task force, and we'll print it to them to speak about an increase in funding, but I think it should be centered very much around the asylum seeker services, because those are the ones that since our last budget, and they said do it, now they've increased even further. And that'll be the same district needs. Is that the proper way to do it, Jessica, I think? All right.
I'll be there. You'll be there. I will. Maybe. I don't know. Hopefully. Yeah.
So-
Yes.
I mean, that's the right way to go, right?
Okay.
So given those changes, given those changes and those comments, we'll ask the budget task force specifically to look at how we beef up these ongoing items and the proper technical way to do the continuing support versus the ask. And then we add in the Ryan items also. All those in favor of those modified changes, please raise your hand. All those against? All those opposed? All those abstaining. Thank you so much. I think we've actually done our.
I don't know if there was an opportunity to raise another expense item, especially as there are projected pegs coming for various agencies and the letters that we've written to both the Department of Buildings and HPD regarding both harassment and then I guess inspection issues. I think it's important to retain staffing levels in both like the inspectors, so that's HPD and Department of Buildings, potentially increase the inspector levels or the number of inspectors. And then there may also be a need on the HPD side to for project managers to address the affordable requests.
So a lot of we done this before, we get an answer back that they're doing that. This is a problem as we make that request. We've asked for DOD inspectors and HPD inspectors maybe for 30 years. And we get this, we're covering that within our existing resources. One of the issues that we're having, he said there's pegs, meaning that there's salary increases. That happens outside of this part of the budget process. Because that's part of the union stuff, it happens and it gets done. So I would hate us to open up again, something up again, because it may just get the same kind of baloney answer thing, you know? Can I just ask that, I want to just commend our committee members here tonight for our next night, for our session, NYCHA session we had. I think as a group, we did well as members. We managed the public the best that we could. There were some people who were dissatisfied, and that's okay. It's going to happen every time. And we're going to keep on meeting with people and going through these issues one at a time. I spoke afterward to a number of the tenants. I spoke to NYCHA. I spoke to Related in Essence. And I said, this was the easiest meeting we'll have. Because it's going to get very contentious going forward about various items. I also want to note going on for our one committee member here tonight who's a NYCHA tenant, you've got to remember your opinion, but also it's very important not to argue with the public because you have a point of view, we respect it, and the public can never feel like us as board members are arguing against them. Sort of like, I disagree, here's what, it's really important to do that. Thank you all. And is there a motion to adjourn by Laura, second by? All those in favor, raise your hand. 16 minutes done. There we are. Fantastic. So